Welcome to the 293rd meeting of the New York Comics and Picture Story Symposium. This is a weekly lecture series on comics, illustration, animation, and other work using text and image. It's sponsored in part by the Will and Ann Eisner Family Foundation. Our guest tonight is Jerry Moriarty. Jerry is a painter and cartoonist, self-described as a paintoonist from New York. He earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from the Pratt Institute and is perhaps best known for his comic Jack Survives, first published as a one-shot by Art Spiegelman's Raw magazine. He taught at the School of Visual Arts in New York City for 50 years, and I was lucky to be in one of his drawing classes in the early 1970s. Besides being a prolific artist, Jerry is a great collector and historian of comics, and first made me reappraise Ernie Bushmiller's Nancy and rediscover the golden age comic book artist Fletcher Hanks. He's also a great collector of illustration from men's magazines of the second half of the 20th century. He now lives in Binghamton, New York. We're here to celebrate his new book from Fantagraphics entitled Visual Crime. Please welcome a working class artist, Jerry Moriarty. So should I start your slideshow right now?
Yeah, may as well. I'll just start talking behind it. Okay, here I am. There it is. The visual crime, as you see, has a artist looking at a picture he had just done, and he's not sure if it's any good, and it's frightening him. It's like the Frankenstein movie. It's alive, you know. In any event, visual crime is really talking about, or he is an illustrator, and his name is Rotart Sulli, which spelled backward is illustrator. And I was an illustrator in my first art experiences after I graduated from Pratt. In 1960, I knew that this is a place where I can maybe get some money, you know, and I majored in well, there was no fine art department then in the 50s at Pratt. It was graphic arts and illustration. And of course they had the other schools, architecture, etc. But I took the graphic arts and illustration. I already loved illustration. I saw it as a experience of the 50s and before the 40s with the Saturday Evening Post and Norman Rockwell covers, and all the magazines had you know, really impressive large pages with illustrations in them. And I took the famous artist course, and I don't know if you even know what that is. That was a correspondence course in the back of comic books you'd see. And you could take by mail lessons that were written by, but not corrected, or because you'd send in stuff by the 12 famous artists, Norman Rockwell, Stephen Tahanas, on and on. There's 12 of them, and they're all illustrators. So I definitely was involved in that. And that's because being here in my hometown, Binghamton, there wasn't much exposure of that sort. There was some art here, and I went to Saturday morning classes, you know, as a kid, and those sort of things definitely happened to me, and I was being sort of given a chance to be an artist by virtue of my father, who would come down in the cellar where the studio was, and I'd call the studio, it was a coal bin with an easel in it. And I was doing pictures, you know, And he would come down after work and stand behind me and say something like, "How about a little red over there, Jer?" And oh yeah, as soon as I would do that. And he had nothing to do with art. He had a 10th grade education, and I was from a working class family. He worked for the telephone company. And my mom would tell these great stories about her childhood as a coal miner's daughter in Blossburg, Pennsylvania. And she left home at the age of 15. So she didn't have much of an education, but she was brilliant. She actually wrote magazine articles and things, at least one, I shouldn't say articles, about flappers, because we're talking about that period of time. So she gave me the stories, and she would tell stories about her family or anything she had experienced wonderfully. And my father would be, supportive of me being an artist. And I had 2 brothers and a sister. They all were, music was another thing that got supported by my father and my mother. So there's where the illustration part came. My father died when I was 15, and I was working in a bowling alley as a pin boy, which I don't know if you have a clue what that is. Before they had machines, they had actual people back there. They would put things in a rack, and when you set the rack down, it would set up the pins. And then the bowlers would throw the ball at the pins, and then you do it again. The next alley would, and on and on. And I was like 13 or 14 when I started working at that, and didn't care for school at all, obviously. Did not have a good brain for school, that's for sure. But I did have the art card, because I figured out people were, and I loved it, were interested in whether you could draw a Superman or not, So I took advantage of the art card all my life, even to this day. And it was real. I mean, I was excited about it. So that's why I took the famous artist course, and still even have the books. The books were beautifully put together, your own binder, big, large pages and stuff. So when I decided to go to, or wanted to go to art school, Pratt was the best at that point. We're talking 1956. And it was also after the Korean War, but before the Vietnam War. So there was a lot of GI Bill people there that were, older, a little bit older than the students. And they had a working, when they played hard. And when they worked hard. And this was a good kind of seasoning. And there were nice people. I mean, I just enjoyed it. Now even joined the ROTC, but I couldn't handle the uniform idea and stuff. And so I didn't stay there long. So when I got out of school in 1960, I was about to be drafted myself, because that was when the draft was on, and everything was coming at once, out of school, got to get work, that kind of thing, and then getting drafted. Well, I worked it out to went to the physical and everything, and worked it out, but, and I was 1A, but I joined the reserve outfit in New York and didn't have to go to active duty. I went on active duty for 6 months, and that was it. And then I was out, and then it was like weekly meetings. And then the 2 weeks every summer. But meanwhile, I'm trying to start my so-called career. I owed money, because I didn't pay for everything. My mom paid for the first year, but I paid for the next 3 by loans, and I owed that money, but I wasn't about to pay it back right away, or they did get on my case. And so I did finally have to pay it back, but it took about 10 years for them to catch up on me, but it wasn't a huge amount of money. So, okay, here I am trying to make enough money to live on. I stayed near Pratt, a lot of students there I knew and stuff. And I go to New York with my big portfolio to get a job. Now the jobs you could get, Actually, my first job was for 17 magazine, which was pretty good, because if it was going to be like that, then I must be having a possibly good career. But that didn't happen very much. So the other choice you had was girly magazines. The ones, the wannabe Playboy magazines. They wanted to be sophisticated, and they were young and new people. So you had a young art director. You would get a full color printed thing out of it and some kind of money. But and the writers were new, and they did what they could with what was available. So that was my first experience as an illustrator. And then it went on that way for about 5 years. So that ended in with a magazine called Eros. And Eros was a sophisticated sex magazine. And it was, the art director was a famous artist, a famous art director in New York. In fact, he redid Saturday Evening Post covers, or designed it over. And Norman Rockwell did a painting of him at his drawing board. Herb Llewellyn is his name. And he got me into, he was a art director for a pharmaceutical house or whatever it was. But he was highly rated and a nice guy. I liked him. I liked a lot of the people I worked with. I mean, I didn't know what to expect, but they knew what everybody had to do, you know? So the experience of that was that Eros was being published by, I can't think of his first name, Frank Ginsberg. In any event, he had a run-in with the somebody was charged, or who's charged with pornography. During that period, there was so many girly magazines and stuff that really cut it close. And he actually was a successful publisher of another kind of magazine. And he said, no, he's going to beat I was going to be in the 4th issue. And this was like highly touted. And he said, no, he's going to beat this. And he didn't. And so he went into the slammer for a while. It's the only person I knew that ever went to jail for pornography in that business. So at that point, he said on the phone, like, you know, I'm going to be in the first issue that came out after this, this trial and everything went on. And of course that didn't happen, but I got the tear sheet. So I got proof that I actually had a full page. And so at that, I said, is there nothing sacred? At that point, I was teaching at SVA. I began teaching there. So that was my support. So when that got along further, I sort of was off the illustration world. Now, getting it back to this picture and everything, Rotart Sulli being this illustrator, he worked for this crime magazine, a visual crime. And the next picture, the next page, is the person that the publisher of Visual Crime calling up Rotart Sulli and giving him an assignment. And I decided to make him a kind of a mob guy, you know, but that wasn't true with my experience. None of these things that refer to a real world have anything to do with real facts of my life. They're just sort of like places where I could depart from pretty interesting things to me, but these didn't actually happen to me or anybody I know. So I have to make them up. So he gets the call, and the next, he gets the call, and what happens is that the publisher says, go to Hotel Ace and go into the, get a room, and you'll be able to, the messenger will visit you and give you the assignment there. So he does as told, gotta go, he's ready to move. This was a cat I had back then. So then I would slip things like that in there, which was always fun, putting things of your own in it. But I don't look like this, in case you wonder. I never did, but I like the idea of a big guy doing a sensitive thing, and so this is what I did with Rotart. Okay, so he's in the hotel and he gets the message. Here's a story to illustrate, but don't leave the hotel. No one is to know that you are an artist on assignment. Signed, publisher. So it means he has to find a place, and this is just the rules in this case. I never got rules like that from anybody, publisher or what otherwise. But it was just a way of saying you had to work within the situations of what you got. Now, this may be a way of saying the jobs always surprised you. They sounded strange or whatever it might be, but you had to do them. And I enjoyed accomplishing it, Okay, so now what's happened is that the stories got condensed. So this is not this. In this presentation, you're going to see about 45 pages, and the book itself is about 120 pages. So a lot of the stories have been condensed to the degree that sometimes they're not going to seem to make sense, and even the full-length stories may not make sense. But I tried. Okay. See, now, this was the the sketches I was doing at the time. I thought I was going to paint these, but I never did. So I was glad to show them in some manner. So Rotart goes down into the cellar, the basement, as a good place for a secret studio. And he does. So he goes down there and he's found a place to hide his easel. He's got all that stuff with him. A portfolio for a illustrator back in the early days was always larger than anybody else's. It seemed to me. On the subway, I'd see people carrying portfolios that were advertising people and photography people and on. But I knew when I saw somebody with a portfolio as big as that, the length of your leg, that would be an illustrator. That they weren't always that huge, but they were bigger for sure. So Rotart's got his classic. Mine finally got really big, and the receptionist wouldn't even go back and get it when I would go to pick up something because it was just too big to carry. I had to have a handle halfway down the side because otherwise it'd be dragging along on the ground, So this way it went up under my armpit and I could walk with it. And they had the subway bombings back then. The bomber in the subway, clandestine guy or somebody was doing that. So I get on a train to go to Manhattan and they see this big bag and I knew they were looking at me. It's like, am I a bomber? That's sad, why should I get pleasure out of that? But then I, started laughing or something. And so anyway, so the next one, the evil janitor would come down and burn things. That's him climbing the stairs. And night after night, he would come down, but he wouldn't see Rotart because Rotart's got his hidden studio and he's painting away, doing his illustration. But the evil janitor, like you see a little airplane there, he would burn things that, wasn't that coal and things. He was burning objects and they were like teddy bears and kind of, helpless things. Okay, then. Then finally, there's a whole bunch of different things in between. It's finished, here he comes. And Rotart has finished the painting, the illustration, and he bumps it accidentally. So all this time, this is 2 weeks later, because that was usually the time you got to do a magazine illustration back then. And then the next would be maybe another week left over for revision, because there's always that. So this is Rotart accidentally knocking just as the evil janitor comes down into the cellar. Okay, next one. So at one point, the evil janitor is burning a teddy bear, and he throws it over his shoulder because it's, caught fire, and he stamps it out, but he's standing now near the finished illustration. And Rotart's freaking because he knows what the evil janitor does. Okay, next. So there's a bunch of things where he, goes through, but then comes to this point where the evil janitor is threatening to burn his painting, and he hits him over the head with a shovel, and then he leaves the cellar, and his assignment's over with, so he made the deadline. Appropriate term, deadline. Okay. Now, this is back to the illustrator himself kind of thing. Gil Stone was my best friend. He taught at SVA, but I met him when I first went there, but he was 3 years younger than me. So I was the second youngest teacher at the time in 1963. Gil Stone was my best friend. He died at the age of 44. Gil was a painter and an illustrator. I made up Rotart Sulli with Gil Stone in mind. Gil would have laughed his ass off at Rotart's strip. That thought alone made it worth doing. And this is in my loft on 28th Street. I had a loft near the school, and 20th and 6th Avenue. It was known as the Flower District back then because the wholesale flower people would come. This is my hand. This is my hallway. I was on the top floor, and it's this is my cat. So next, this is Gil. Gil, as a painter, or even as an illustrator, he would do a little drinking, you see. So right beside him is a glass of wine, or this is in my loft. And he worked out, and he was a big guy, and he lifted weights, especially when he got to be fatter than he wanted to be, and so that would be him as the painter. Next slide. This is Gil as the illustrator. Like he'd come back from doing a job for Sports Illustrated, and he was down in Daytona 500 or something. And this would be the Gil, the other Gil, same guy, of course. And he was hugely successful. He became a illustrator, the main illustrator for Penthouse, and good friends with Bob Guccione, the publisher of Penthouse. And in his 20s, he got a prix to Rome. So he went to Rome to study in the American Academy, not as an illustrator, but as a painter. So he had both going for him, and hell of a nice guy. My best friend, as I said. Okay, next. Okay, now this is a series that I presented to the New Yorker. Now this is in the Flower District where I live. And I decided, I've always felt this way about American Indians, that they were creative, resourceful, survivalist kinds of people. And I admired them and still do, of course. So I decided to have an American Indian in New York. I felt like I was that, even though I love New York huge. I mean, I lived there 50 years, 60 years actually. I think of the art school time. But I always felt I was from someplace else, which it turned out I was, but I wasn't. When I got back to Binghamton to live, I'm a New Yorker. There's no doubt, and I miss it. But I miss it so much I can't go back. You know, it's just so sad. Um, but it was wonderful. And, and I was lucky to get that great place to live and stuff. Zero Mostel lived in my place. The Fiddler on the Roof guy, Zero Mostel. I met him. He was still living in the area when he was doing Fiddler on the Roof, and he would crack me up because he was a painter originally. He was a comedian. I got a thing from Life magazine from 1943, you know, on him. Big article on the stand-up, and the photograph was of his place, my place at that point, and I would see him on the street, and he would take cigarettes out of my pack and stick them in his nose and pull shtick on me all the time. Yeah, but he was great. I mean, so that was the kind of place it was. I mean, it was all artists and writers and things like that. This was not Soho. This is, you know, like my building was built in 1852, and it looked it in a really great way. So that, you know, that's that. So now to have the Indian there, my Indian, who is / idealized me, looking at the people that were delivering the wholesale flowers from all over the world. I mean, you smell it would come up, and it was wonderful. But it'd be about 4 a.m. they'd start, and these big trucks would come in, and they would work until noon. Then the retail people would be coming by to pick up the wholesale, you know, to turn them into retail. And originally the buildings, some of the buildings, actually the whole area is called Tin Pan Alley. This is where, at the turn of the century, all of the great American music began. George Gershwin, Irving Berlin, all those people lived to be near the publishers. They lived in this area. They lived in my building. They lived in the building next door. So and now it's been landmarked. So no one, you know, it can't be sold. 4 buildings, mine included, 4 next to each other. So next. This was one that was published in the New Yorker. I did it to be a cover, but it ended up being inside. And it's a picture, as you see, of the Indian looking at a garbage man throwing a buffalo head, a sacred animal to the Indian, to Western Indian, into the crusher. And a strange thing is that I didn't, you know, the one thing that I do, even my classes were about, was to work from your head and not to work from references unless, you know, something was definitely needed to be found. And I was doing something recently of my experience as an illustrator in the early 60s, being on the subway. So what the hell does a 1960s subway look like? Google time, I found it, and, you know, so glad because it reminded me again. But I would look up that stuff, you know, things that were necessary because there's no other way you could make it up. But I did make up the buffalo. And I always wondered, well, at that time, I wondered where the ears were. Were they under the horns? Where were the ears of the buffalo? And ironically, about 6 months later, I'm in a flea market around the corner from where I lived on 6th Avenue. Now there's a big building there. And what do I see? But a large stuffed buffalo head, a beautiful buffalo head. So you know I had to buy that buffalo head and bring it home. So I do have a buffalo head in my hallway here, facing the door to greet anybody that comes in. And he's so great looking. It's just beautiful. Anyway, that's well afterwards. See, I mean, at the time I was doing this, I was watching Dances with Wolves a lot, you know, looking for where are the buffalo here, you know. But now, you know, I didn't have a computer then. You know, this is my pre-computer illustration times. I didn't get a computer until 2002. So all the stuff that you're seeing now is pre that time. So you had to have a bunch of Life magazines, which I did have. I just collected Life magazines to the nth degree, old ones, new ones, whatever. Or you went to the public library, which seemed too stuffy. I didn't want to do that. But a lot of my illustrator friends did. So next, so this is when I thought of one day when the building behind me, which is now in a section called Koreatown on 29th Street. I can see the Empire State Building right from my window. I mean, you know, like there's a lot of buildings in front of it, but it's not that far away. On 28th Street, the Empire State Building is 34th Street. So the Indians on a roof now, and they're having a party outside. This is a bunch of people. It was a factory building originally back in the day, and it turned into a condominium. And, you know, and a lot of artists also and photographers, et cetera, lived there. So I figured that would be the most daunting thing for the Indian to look at, you know, and I'm literally, that's my roof. And two mourning doves started visiting me, the area, and I started feeding them, and they're just like plain birds, you know, they're like pigeons with this, all the same color. You couldn't tell one from the next, you know, and they're just sweet birds. And so I just wanted the mourning dove to have the Indian to have the mourning doves as I had. Next. Now this one also was published in the New Yorker. And this one has got a picture of me and my cat, as you've seen 3 times now, and my father, Jack, you know, as a memory. He died when he was 52, so that's about the right age. And he stayed as Jack survives that age. And there's the Indian on top of the roof playing a saxophone. Yes, I do play the saxophone. All free jazz. I don't play, you know, I did play with a punk rock group that was at CBGB's. That was I was the only acoustic instrument there, so no one could hear me, which was perfect. And Patrick McDonald, the guy who did does Mutts, that was his band. It was called Steel Tips, and it was perfect for me, you know. And his brothers paid out, and this like really small bandstand, everybody, and it was in the early days of stage diving, you know. And it was like crazy. I was the oldest guy there, of course, you know, because well, I was the oldest guy there, so I didn't care. Patrick was he was a student of mine, and he was a good friend, you know, and he would just call me out of the blue, you know, and say, "Hey, we're going to play tonight. You want to come?" I'd grab my sack, jump in the cab, get down there to the Bowery, and show up, and no one knew what the hell I was going to play. I didn't know, because I just played, you know, my own made up crap, you know, and the band didn't care. But the other bands would come on, you know, like the Dead Boys, you know, from Cleveland, and his girlfriend, Patrick's girlfriend, was always, she was the dancer singer in the group, and she was always wearing these Catholic girl skirts and things, and the Dead Boys would sing songs about screwing Catholic girls or something, and so Patrick's girlfriend, a great dancer and singer too, incidentally, jumped up on the stage. She told everybody she was going to do this, and she jumped up on the stage and grabbed the microphone, and the lead singer, who looked like Mick, you know, a sad Mick Jagger, you know, I mean, very thin, Stiff Batters, I think his name was. He was pulling on the microphone, and she let go of it. And it smashed him in the mouth. He started bleeding. It was perfect, a perfect punk scene, you know. And she was wonderful. They weren't going to screw with us because one of the singers was a giant guy. he was part of the pagan, motorcycle groups in New Jersey. He was a New Jersey guy, and well, anyway, that's another story, isn't it? I'm sorry. That's from not teaching in a long time. Okay, so, okay, now this is another kind of magazine that came out. Well, it goes back to the 30s, and they were called pulp magazines back then, but these are called men's adventure magazines. And they were coming out in the new versions of them anyway, in the 50s. And we of the girly magazine ilk, looked down upon them because they didn't have these great stories. And they had these like really corny illustrations done from photographs and done from live models. And I used to think they were corny anyway. And I used to think that, that we were girly magazine artists were superior or whatever. This was closer to painting, etc. So what happened was that years later, I'm in a flea market on Canal Street, and I think Ben was there too. I think I got my cat, the yellow cat that we've been seeing. Anyway, in that flea market, because somebody had brought the cat. But there was a pile of girly magazines there. And I knew them because I was in them, so I knew the covers. But then there was a pile of men's adventure magazines next to it. And I thought, well, I'm going to have a good laugh and look at the men's adventure magazines. And I opened it up. And this is after I'd been doing things for Raw. And also I was a comic artist. I was a cartoonist at that point. And I opened them up, and I'm dumbfounded. They were engaging, and I was enjoying the ridiculousness of the stories. The covers would be women fighting in scantily clad women fighting Nazis with Tommy guns, all dressed up fighting Nazis. That would be on the cover, and then inside there'd be the illustrations for the stories, which are quite long. They go back in the book, and the first part of the book would have this white place to start the story, have the headings and stuff, and then they go back and to be a long story. But my stories would begin and end in these things. But anyway, because I was so thrilled by how surreal these were, the pictures. The stories, they still look like they sucked. I was about to read them, but that meant that when I decided to do these stories for myself, just because I was engaged by it, I began to write these 250-word long stories that would fit completely into white squares, and I didn't copy anything. It's just still from my head, But I kept the more realistic look to them. And I enjoyed doing that, writing these stories. And so this book is really, in a sense, based on the book itself. Visual Crime is based on this period of time. This was in the late 80s. And so I did, this one is about a bank robbery, and the guy's on a manhole working, and here's the stories. The bank's going to be robbed. There's the car parked too close to this manhole, and he hooks up the car with alligator clips and wires to the mainframe in the manhole. So when they touch the door, the bank robbers are going to get electrocuted. But instead, they bring a hostage, this poor young lady, from the bank, and she touches the door. Everybody dies in my stories here. Okay, next. Including this person. I'm not going to tell you the whole story. This just gives you an idea. Somebody that goes to a flea market and keeps on finding the same guy selling things from her childhood. And she's not going to tell him that she goes every Sunday to buy something, and she keeps on finding things from her childhood. And so she doesn't tell him. And well, the story's there for you to read, but that's the nature of the story. It's indoor. And it's a picture of I'm pointing towards my kitchen here. It's a picture of this kitchen when I was a kid, and my mom, sort of looks like my mom, and a table. I got the same table and everything now. So, okay, so let's see what the next one is. Just give you a feeling. This would have been placed after the Indian on the roof, playing saxophone, because I wanted some connection there. I was thinking that might be good, but it's not necessary. It's probably even better not going from Indian to Indian, having the same confusion of that. So this is about an Indian who had helped somebody who was about to be hit by a car, pulled him out of the way. And I made up a whole kind of idea of what that meant to the Indian in the sense of that he would become responsible for her life after that point. So he would follow her around and she would sort of see him, but not really. Anyway, it's a story to be read. She's being mugged at this point. Okay, Ben. Killer Waitress. This is one of my fun stories. I did actually like this one. I mean, I like them all basically, but they're not written for their literary value. They're written for having something to draw and something to paint. In a sense, I'm becoming the art director, giving me the assignment to do a picture of whatever I had as a script to work from, which I got from the art director, which in fact I didn't because I wrote the story. And I would write the story to be visual. I mean, I would write the story for images, and I would come up with these, completely innocent images, which I would never thought I would do. But that's the nature of illustration, was you didn't know what you were going to get. They probably thought it was appropriate for you to do them. Maybe not. They just gave them up. But I think probably they did. I worked with a number of them many times. Not a number of them, but a few of them many times. So they did know my style. So that made me write the story and change it even. When I got to the painting, I go back and change the story because the painting gave me something new to think about, or the illustration. I keep saying painting because I don't separate them, though. There are different things I do for painting than I do for illustration. Okay, next. Yeah, this is a strange story about a crowd of crazy people, and I call it Crazy Crowd for that reason. And well, it's so strange. I can't even. I won't bore you with it. But I like the image, therefore, that's why I would include it in it. Okay, next. Okay, this one is back in the day, back when I was a kid, they had meter readers come to the house inside, and your meter was in the cellar, So in this house, the meter was in the cellar, and the meter man comes to the door, and says, "Gas man," and meter man or whatever. And my mom or the mother, the woman of the house, is on the telephone and sees, lets him in, and he goes down into the cellar, and then she has to go out to get groceries or something, and she leaves and the light is still on in the cellar, and she thinks, my God, he left the light on. That's strange. Anyway, she had to go. She wasn't going to think about it, and she comes back, and the light's on still, and she takes her groceries inside, and she goes back out to pick up some more of her groceries, and she finds when she comes back in the second time, there's an open bag. It's been ripped, and a chicken is missing, and things like that. And she's wondering, what is going on? And she goes to bed, and the next day she finds things are gone from the refrigerator. And, the rest of the story is that she's smelling urine in the cellar. And she asked her husband, "Are you pissing in the cellar now?" You know, and he claims he wasn't. And she accepted that, but why was there a smell of urine in the cellar coming from the open door? So she decides to go down in the cellar to see what's going on, you know, and she goes down in the cellar, and there is the meter man hanging, swaying back and forth. Who knows why he did it, but he lived in the cellar for quite a while, and stealing food out of the refrigerator at night. And so that's the end of that story. I like doing this story. Okay, next one. Okay, now we're at the point of much more recent. This is like 3 years ago. And I decided that I've been painting my illustrations to the point of where there was a certain kind of like, I don't know, showing off of my skills, you know, to the degree that, not that I thought I was that brilliant, but you know, I had to work at getting it right, you know. But sort of kind of, I was sort of getting out of my case about the maleness. Yeah, I thought I was a male, but the female, getting in touch with the female side of me came at a point when I realized all my pictures had a male quality to them, which is fine because I wanted it, you know, I liked it. But I thought, what's the female side of me? Because it's probably part of the nature of my art was the sensitivity I would associate with perhaps the female part of me, if there even is such a thing. But I just took it on and said, okay, that's acceptable to me. What would I do by opening that door and closing the other one temporarily? So I began to examine myself in content and other ways about its maleness and its femaleness. And I did that book, What's a Paintoonist, for the same publisher, for Gary Groth at Fantagraphics. And that was, even though it was biographical about my mom and my dad and stuff, I started to paint less dramatically. No shadows, no texture, no shiny things, no, you know, no drama, playing the drama down. As you've just seen, that's the stuff I was doing just before that. I was doing dramatic things, and this happened in 2002 or so. I began to wake up to the thought that I probably had this other aspect of my nature that I wanted to see what it was. And I enjoyed it a lot. And so What's a Paintoonist has that changeover from my Jack Survives, which was the paintoonist in me. You know, why I call myself a paintoonist was that I used a lot of white acrylic and black big fat paint, not paint, indie ink, and white acrylic, watered down. You know, that would be my whiteout, basically. So I had no fear of putting something down because I could paint it out. I wanted to even leave the brush strokes in. See, that was another part of my nature, of that nature that I was exploring. My biggest influence, and Ben would agree with this for himself as well, I think to some degree, was Bob Weaver. Robert Weaver was an illustrator that I fortunately had as a teacher at the end of my Pratt years. He came over from SBA where he was teaching. And he would do, with illustration, they looked like paintings. They didn't look like they were, you know, so highly crafted. They were expressionists. And he was very well known. I mean, he was successful. He was in Life magazine. He traveled with JFK and Jackie to do on the spot stuff, reportage. And there's always a look to his work that was so distinctly his. And I got to know him at SVA. One of the reasons I went there was because he was there, and he became my mentor. So there was a lot of great influence, and it came from the illustration side, not from the painting side. Though I did love abstract expressionist painting. Philip Guston was one of my favorites, and then he turned around. Philip Guston at the end of his career, he died way too young too. But he turned around and started doing these great goofy things, you know, that were really based on underground comic and Andy Warhol, whatever it was. It was kind of like a different type of thing than he'd done before. So between Philip Guston and Bob Weaver, I became, you know, engaged in at least two aspects of things. So paintoonist is a real word for me. But illustrator could be said as well, you know. And I think I'm in the illustrator plays, you know, my illustrator, painter, and Rotart Sulli got me there. So here it is. The phone call now is not from the Mob Guy publisher. It's from a female art director. And she's really based on the grocery store I go to, one of the checkers, the cashiers. I used to work at a grocery store myself back in the day. Somehow she just struck me as like a working class lady. And I like that look to her. She was very nice. I haven't been to the grocery store since March. I'm 83 years old, so I'm not allowed out of the house. And there's no one in the house but me. And some cats I feed that belong to other people. True confession. Anyway, so she calls. She's got a binoculars there, and there's no dialogue. You know, she's got the phone on, and there's Rotart playing his saxophone. And this is my loft. So, you know, the loft I came from. She's not. You know, she's someplace else. And the phone rings. Next, ring. And Rotart says yes, and you can see what this was actually to set up. There's more than one window there, and the art directors at Visual Crime, publisher has a story for you to illustrate. And she says okay, and she says I will send the messenger. Okay, next, and I mean there's a whole bunch of things I would have done in between. I mean every cartoonist would find a way to, you know, cut it down from what it was. So I did too. But I knew I wasn't going to put more than 2 panels on each page. This is like a 2-page spread. So there's a page in between these two. Not a page, I'll split them into, this is 1 page, this is the 2nd page. So he picks it up, Rotart Sulli, the messenger doesn't knock on his, or maybe he knocks on his door. Doesn't matter, he didn't have to go through that stuff. In fact, I did. I had to knock, 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 and I had all kinds of crap in there. So then now he's reading. He's sitting in his chair and he's having a cup of coffee and reading it. And to Rotart Sulli, when picture is done, put it in your back window. It will be seen. Signed, publisher. Okay. It will be seen. You know, Rotart says, and he's looking in his back window. And he's looking across at what the Indian was looking at, you know, in the earlier one, that big building across from me. And then as you see is look over, just pretty much what I would have thought it would look like, my place and the building across. And there's the art director with the telescope looking at him. And he's about to come out of the, him meaning me, meaning Rotart. Them. Next. And as he's coming out, she goes back in. And he says this classic line, what the fuck, you know? I can't see anything. We'll start now. Yeah, the next one. He goes to do the job. And then he does the sketches there. He's not painting on it, he's doing the sketches. And I would say son of a bitch a lot, you know, and all the sketches are on the floor that didn't work. And then finally, and then walking back to where the easel is the smaller easel. I used to paint on this as kind of a painter's ledge. My paintings were generally 4 feet by 5 feet. Some of them were 6 feet by 6 feet, and they were done in oil. These are done on Strathmore 3-ply, Bristol board. Is this Bristol board? Yeah, 3-ply, and that God, I can't remember the name. Artone ink, Indian ink, and white acrylic again, watered down so I could use it. I didn't have to use it very much here because I was okay to leave things. And I didn't use any rulers, and I'm getting shaky, you know? And so I kind of said, hey, that's all right. First, I didn't say that, but you know, I fought it off. Okay, so next is Rotart walks back with the blank canvas. It's small here. Now it's my standard size. It's shrunk to 24 by 36. I think that's the size, or that's in that area. And that's my great Selmer saxophone. I loved it. I love it. I still play, even though I don't play, you know, and I record them for myself. If you went to my YouTube thing, you hear the background would be the saxophone, but you could always go to mute. Mute is available. Okay, next. And there he's painting away. And in that paint area, like I say, I would do my illustrations back there and my comic stuff back there. And then I would do the big paintings, which are lined up behind that, leaning against the wall. I had them all here. And that was a bitch, you know, getting all my paintings up here. But that's okay. I mean, I don't sell my art. It's not because I think I'm so great that anybody would want to buy them, but there was something about when I was first an illustrator, how you didn't get your art back and you got paid, but you didn't get your art back. So it was just the notion that I wanted my art. I mean, because I'm not after big bucks. I mean, I was after survival money, and I like to make it and I like to publish. In fact, I liked everything reproduced, you know? I like CDs better than live music, you know? I mean, even though I would go to jazz clubs, and in fact, I did a series of drawings of jazz players at Slugs, at, all those places on the Lower East Side, and they had the thing called loft jazz back in the 70s, in the 80s, especially the 80s, where you could just go there and didn't cost you anything. You just sit down on, you know, folding chair, and person would be playing, and I had my sketchbook, which was a pretty good sized book, 11 by 14, and it was in a bound book, so it didn't even look like I was writing things down, like I was criticizing or something. Somebody actually came up and said, "Are you a critic?" You know, I said, "No, I love what's going on. If you wanted to hear that," but it was amazing. So I did a bunch of that, and Fantagraphics is going to. They say they're going to publish it, but it was done in the 70s. I just broke up with my girlfriend. She'd gone away, and I figured, okay, God, I got to get active. I'm not going to just sit in this place and make art because that's not going to be enough. I'm going to have to go out. So I made myself go to. There's two things I did. I drew women cellists. I love the cello. It's a classical instrument. I love that range, that sound. It's a human voice. So I would go to Alice Tully Hall, Juilliard School, and I'd sit in the third row and draw the cellist. I'd sit in the third row on the right-hand side, and I'd draw the cellist, the women cellists. I mean, it didn't have to be beautiful or anything, just draw. I, for some reason, was drawn to that. And they used to have a thing in the back of the Village Voice where you could go for free or up to $5. And I would find all these loft jazz places you could go to, you know. I mean, I could afford to have gone and spent the money, but it was just, that was just a way to know what was around that would, you know, not necessarily be too posh for me, you know. But I did go to Juilliard to do their stuff, you know. And they got to know me, and they started waving from the stage when I'd sit down. But I wouldn't sit in the front row because that's like too obvious. I was in the third row back, you know. So the acoustics wasn't that great for me, you know, but it was fine enough. And I got to know some of them, and I went to a cellist party at one point. Anyway, so that was that game, that time. So I did do things from real people as well, and I enjoyed doing them a lot. And it was great to go out there. And it was like my date, it was my sketchbook. You know, I didn't take anybody with me. It was me and my sketchbook. Anyway, so next, he's done. So he goes across the loft. Rotart goes to the window, puts the painting facing out, as you see. And it's a story I had done back in the day of somebody, you know, two yuppies going to a lawyer party or something in Soho. And one of them gets really drunk and the other one, and he makes a piss call and pisses on the wall. And then his yuppie friend lights his urine. You know, I don't know what happened, you know, but there you go. Another story I made up, you know, but this one I took seriously enough to do it as a painting, you know, so to speak. That's acrylic. That's basically that size. And it wasn't, you know, it was something I already done. It wasn't something I did for the story. It was already done before in the 90s. So this was done, like I said, a couple of years ago. And then there's another story at the end of the book, which is a follow-up to this because they didn't want to publish the book at the time of the election. So Gary decided, you know, he would publish it later, you know. So I had time to do some more work. So I said, hey, I'll do another story. If you want it, great. I want to work. I mean, you know, that's just me. What can I tell you? I am a working class artist. Now, the working class artist thing, I just jumped onto when I was doing this, you know, and what that meant, well, not that I'm making a political statement or anything, you know, I'm not saying working class is great people, though mostly I get along with working class and my family was working class. But you know, the notion that I had being from that class was that artists were from another class. It was this dumb thing to think, but that's typical of me anyway. But I would, you know, so I was assuming going to school in New York, that I'm going to come across a lot of like, whatever I thought were, you know, posh people were like. I knew some here, you know, and they were fine. But I just went the next step, you know, whatever my generation did back then. I'm from the time of the beatniks. I'm from the time of cool. The word cool meant something then by virtue of cool. James Dean, Marlon Brando, and cool jazz. That was my favorite jazz. Was always cool jazz, Coltrane, etc. You know, Ornette Coleman, and then it went to out jazz. You know, and free jazz, wave free jazz, and I fell in love with that too. And I like classical. I think anybody that's an artist would tell you that they listen to something when they're making their art. I mean, most people I know anyway. I listen to music, and I think most people do. But I program my own music. Now I just listen to the radio, and there's a certain station that in New York I used to listen to WKCR, which is the Columbia University station, and they played pretty strong things. And there was a station in Princeton or near Princeton. The Kaz, you know Kaz, the cartoonist, he was in my class as well. Not, I didn't teach cartooning. I taught drawing from your head and painting from your head. So it wasn't like I drew in cartoonists or want to be or going to be cartoonists necessarily. People just want to draw from their head. And, you know, representationally, I mean, you know, I don't mean tight. I mean, this is as tight as I ever got in my life from my head. But I'm okay with it because I'm taking, you know, I'm getting rid of the extra stuff that I was doing before. Who knows? I may look back at this in 2 or 3 years and say, hey, dummy. I do that with a lot of my stuff that I've looked back at and say, why didn't you know then? You know, you love this. And now you look at it and say, you dumbass, you know, why didn't you know that? Well, that's how it works for me. I don't go straight ahead and just rise to whatever, you know. I go to the place where I have to be, meaning, I don't mean like in a mystical way. I mean, I've done this now. Why would I go and do so much more of that? Why don't I challenge myself? So it's just a matter of self-challenge. So the comic thing originally was a self-challenge. I got this grant, and I went upstate in 1979, an EA grant, and decided, okay, I'm going to take time from doing survival things to do things for myself. So at that point, I was collecting comics, and I was very much involved. I said, I'm going to do a comic, and that's when I started doing Jack. And I called him Middleman because I was living near Middletown. So then I came back and I saw a underwear commercial and for Fruit of the Loom, and the middle fruit guy was called Middleman. I said, well, I've got to change his name, and I knew it was my father, Jack Moriarty. So I said, why can't I call him Jack? So that's how that happened. So things happen, you know, when you're ready for them, and take advantage of it. I believe in coincidence. I totally believe in coincidence. Doesn't mean I don't believe in spirituality. I do, but I believe in coincidence. I don't look for it. It just happens, and I say, that's a coincidence, act on it. And, you know, sometimes it works. Many times it works. So trust yourself that way, you know. I mean, I'm talking to you like you're my students. You know, I would say that to my students. I'm sorry, please forgive me. But it's a compliment because I like my students. I like, you know, hanging out with them. And I would sit and talk with each one at a time, you know, about, because the first problem they would be doing in my class is do a memory of any time in your life. And I'd sit down and talk with him about about the memory, you know, what he thought. But I also tell him, and there's one other thing I do. I always write things before I do them. I mean, I'll go through a writing phase of just writing stupid things. At one point, I was writing about Jack committing suicide. And it was like, my father committing suicide? He didn't. Poor guy had a heart attack at work, you know, and gone at the age of 52. So, and I loved him dearly. I mean, I love my parents dearly, but you know, that's the strangeness I can tap when I write, and I'll never do it. But I'm awed at the fact that I wrote that at all. And I just recently read that, and it's something I've written 30 years ago. So writing things down, I do recommend that if you you know, get into a bind, just write. It's great. I don't mean write stories. I'm saying, you know, write what you want to write, of course, but you know, just about what you want to do. It's more than a diary, you know. It becomes a diary, but it's more than a diary. You're not saying dear diary. So that's oh yeah, last page, right? Did you show that? Oh no, just as far as we got.
Yeah.
I've been talking all this time. I'm sorry, you guys. So the art director is looking out at the painting in the window, because she's, as you see in the corner, she's in the building across the way, and she's looking down, and Rotart is looking up at her, knowing she's there, and smiling, and he's pleased with himself. And this is one Rotart that's pleased with himself, and he's having his cup of coffee. Okay, now the last one. Yeah, and this is the original painting I used. I mean, I used it, I photographed it to put it in the illustration as well. So, so that's the story. Okay, I am finished. Okay, Ben, did I talk long enough?
Would you like to take some questions?
Sound's not on.
Oh, some questions. Oh.
My sound on?
Can you hear me?
Can't hear you sound. I heard you before. What's wrong? Okay, I just almost heard you.
I don't know, wait.
Oh, now I can hear you.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So any questions, please put them in the chat, and and maybe I'll try to unmute people. Anybody? Any questions?
I think they're afraid I'm going to answer.
I have a question.
Okay.
You talked about writing and like it's kind of like a diary. Is all of your writing, do you feel like it's pretty close to autobiographical or semi-autobiographical?
Anything I do is autobiographical. And the writing, when I was talking about the writing, meaning for your work, when you're working, before you know what to do, that's biographical in its existence, because it's about you thinking things through. But I also write, obviously, for the men's adventure things and the other stuff. That's clearly because I'm going to illustrate it and stuff. So it's definitely for my art. In that regard, directly for my art, because I will change the writing because the illustration I'm doing made me, hey, that's an idea. I want to do that too, you know. And then I'll change the, you know, the writing as well as the illustration. I'll keep it together because the writing gets printed with the illustration in this case. And it's like I said, 250 words. It's like, you know, over with. It's easy to read, it's fast to read, and, you know, more likely to be read, as opposed to the real men's adventure magazines of my time. You don't want to read that. And you know you don't want to read that. You look at the pictures, but you don't want to read it. Answer your question? Does that answer?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
A question from Michael Dooley. Wait, can I?
Uh-huh.
About.
Okay, yeah, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, what I wrote was I had been recently reading your the interview that you did with Chris where he was talking with you about your work, and I got the filter that he was thinking about his work in terms of his questions.
Yeah.
And it started making me wonder what your perspective was on various aspects of Chris's work.
Oh,
comment?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Chris is a sweetheart. I mean, he's just a nice guy, real, totally good guy, hardworking guy, as well as great artist. He's inspired me in many ways. He had a character at one point early on that was like Stardust, my Fantagraphics, not Fantagraphics, old-fashioned hero, superhero that I discovered in going to these comic conventions from the early 1940s. And he had a character that he used that he would go to another planet and he had a robot. And on that planet was a robot. You know the story?
Mm-hmm.
You know the story I'm talking about?
That's pretty sure, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. You know, where his robot he brought with him, he leaves behind and he goes with the other robot back to the plane. Yeah, I just love that to pieces. Just, you know, what could be better than that? And he's very articulate, you know. I mean, when he talks and this, you know, when we communicate email-wise, etc. He just knows stuff really right, you know, and I'm glad he's doing well. I mean, I think he's doing well, and he always sends me a Christmas card, and his Christmas cards are incredible in their way. And he's really way smarter than I am in real terms. I mean, in a good way. I'm saying, yeah, it's not smarter, you know, that kind of thing. I mean, he's a good guy, smarter. You know, I know my place, and that he's not putting me in my place. He relates to me in a good way.
Yeah. And are there particular aspects of his work that you relate to, and what ways are they relating to your work?
Well, I think you know, the notion that he uses things that are so you know, if he had people on the street, they'd have, their phones would be lit up, you know, and there'd be things like that that I, of course, don't come from that generation of it, but I love seeing them because they make sense to me, and they also are part of the humanness of his work. You know, the everydayness of his work with the sophistication. His art is complicated as hell. I mean, to me, sometimes I can't look at it because it's like, oh my God, I got to learn art here, you know, to go into this, you know. And I do have a problem with that, but that is pure Chris, you know, and he can shift from one position to another in such a flawless way. I mean, like I said, he wrote this thing for the Guardian, you know, that it was about graphic novels, and he included me in it. You know, he's just seen what's a paintoonist, and he, you know, and he, in this magazine they had, he was the guest author in a magazine called The Week. I love that magazine. It's just like it's so easy to read, and it reminds me of the old Reader's Digest in a sense, but there's pictures and there's good commentary. And I opened up one day because it comes weekly, so I'm having my cup of coffee and I open it up. What do I see in the author's thing? Chris Ware. And I go, my God. And so I had to write him. I said, he said he didn't know who read the magazine. You know, he was pleased to know somebody that could, you know, relate to it. And he said he didn't talk about graphic artists as much. He talked about, you know, we call them legitimate artists, for lack of a better term. Not legitimate artists, but legitimate authors. So he didn't write about graphic writers as much. He wrote about, you know, Moby Dick and things like that, you know.
Yeah, the interview that I had read goes back a ways, I think around 2009, 2010, from Believer magazine.
From which one?
Was the interview, the Believer magazine?
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah, it's about a decade or so ago.
Oh,
that was the article that I read. Yeah,
yeah.
Well,
no,
check out the Guardian.
That's a beauty. That article. We did it all by email. We never talked. He was in Chicago at that time. He was in New York for a while, but he was in Chicago at that time. I mean, he's there now, or outside of Chicago, somewhere outside Chicago. And he sent him in, and I answered him. And boy, he picked up on the other things in it too. With whatever I answered, he had something else. He didn't add it like it suffered. It smothered it. It was there as an enhancement. You know, it truly gave me information. You know, that was very, very adequate, more than adequate. It was accurate, and I loved it. No, he's a good man. He's one of my faves. I mean, one of my. There's not too many of them. Maybe there's three. Ben's one of my faves. And I didn't teach him, and then Ben I didn't teach either. But I mean, he wasn't in my class. So this one of the people I met through Raw, you know, because he came into Raw in the later years when Raw was a smaller magazine, and Ben came into Raw in the very beginning, you know, along with me, or ahead of me, or even I don't know. But it was a great time I mean, it was a great place to be, and I met him through that. There'd be a Raw party or whatever, and Art Spiegelman and Francoise would have a party in their loft, and I met him there. I mean, you know, most of them I met through that experience. And she's the art director of New Yorker, so that gave me my in, and she came to me right away. She was very supportive. And everybody else, I mean, Chris as well has done a lot of New Yorker covers and all of that, you know. So these are all extensions, like we help each other in a way, in a real way, you know.
Yes, nice. Thank you very much.
Yeah, glad to say it. Take care, buddy.
Question from iPhone 2. I'm not sure who that is.
Okay.
Is iPhone 2 there? Just why did
Yeah,
oh, there.
I just wanted to know why he moved to Binghamton.
Well, my house, my loft, the whole area, like four different buildings there were sold to a private person who was going to build skinny hotels there. In that section of New York, they were popping up all over the place. And this was known as the Flower District, and it was less so. It was getting more yuppie time. Yuppie's an old word, but young urban professional, that's what that comes from. And it was getting filled in with condominiums. But there's a lot of us from the neighborhood that stayed there and stayed in the same buildings for years. I was there 50 years in my building. And so when it got sold, at the same time I was having trouble at SVA, even though I'd been there 50 years. And I said, I'm too old for this. So I get a phone call from my nephew, who was a Binghamton policeman at one time. He's retired now, saying that he'd been to this house I lived in when I was a kid, because somebody was working on doing something in this house, and he needed a tool that my nephew had. So he came, and he said he was there. And I said, do you suppose that the person living there now would be willing to sell the house? Because I knew I had to get out of New York, because I didn't want to hang around there with all that may be going on, losing the building and etc. So I came here, and I had money that I didn't know I had. And I got money because the person that was buying the building had to buy it with tenants in it, and then had to buy them out individually. So he bought me out, and I left. So I came to Binghamton, and I miss New York. Binghamton isn't bad, but I'm not out of the house much. I'm a loner. So being in New York was easy for me, because you're really not alone in New York. There's always somebody's window that's on, and there's somebody actively, creatively, or whatever you want to call it, doing something. In Binghamton, I got one next door neighbor that was a jerk, and the other next door neighbor could have been a nicer guy, or two vet. And that's it. I mean, otherwise I'm not out of the building even hardly. There's no one else here. And there's cats. I adopted a cat from my backyard because they're let out.
Did you buy your childhood home?
Yes, I did.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, it was a good deal. And I thought I was going to see ghosts and stuff. Not that I really thought that, but I thought, what would it be like, So one day I close it, and it's got the same cabinets and things in the kitchen. I closed the cabinet door. Boom, the sound was like, wow, that's it. But no other ghosts. My whole family lived here. And it looks the same. The bathroom's exactly the same. They're going to change that. And I said, don't change it. The attic is the same. The cellar's the same, and same everything, but I'm sort of not visiting. I'm completely acclimated to it. I've been here 7 years now, and it's worked out. It's worked out fine. Like I got hot on getting things published and stuff from here. My last thing that was published in New York was for Alvin Bonaventura Press. It was Jack Survives with all the white stuff left in, and so you could see it. Because what Raw did is they went to high contrast, so it dropped all the whiteout stuff, which is fine. It looked great. I wouldn't have thought they'd done that, and I didn't know anything about that. But Bonaventura made a hardcover out of it, and it was 11 by 14, so it was a little bit larger, and it was great. And then he died. So then I called up Gary Roth from Fantagraphics, and I'd known him in New York. I'd met him at one of those conventions in New York, and I knew him, so he's a good guy. I knew about him. He knew about my stuff, and so he said, "Yeah, okay." So Jack, What's a Paintoonist was born, and now this one is visual crime. So did I overshare?
There's a question from Tom. Let me try to unmute you.
Okay.
Oops. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Oh, you mean
Tom
Tom?
there? Yeah.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Oh, hi.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Tom.
Hi. I'm wondering if high modernism or the abstract expressionists in any way are still kind of percolating maybe in the back of your mind while you're working.
Well, they're a goal. I mean, what they represent to me is the big reach. You know, to reach out to say to yourself, painter thing does exist. I haven't painted since I've been here with oil paints in that large scale of, you know, I would build these huge stretchers, you know, and they would be 6 feet by 6 feet, because the old abstract expressionist concept was no direction. Don't have it go left, right, up or down. So square was kind of like, I fell onto that when I was we did have painting classes at Pratt, but they were painting classes. They weren't a department of painting, you know. And so we did have some good painters. I think Guston did teach there at one point. I don't know. I didn't have him, but Stephen Green taught there. I had him, and he was a great guy to meet. Wow. So I do think of painting is a place. And if it hits me someday, whenever, 83, those days or whatever they are, I feel fine. I mean, I'm not bitching about it, but the whole notion is, I do think it's still a possibility. Though my oil paints I left in New York. I got my acrylics though, right. and I still like, you know, there is a change, there is a touch of things that happens with the paint. I mean, there's a real change, but the abstract part and the modern part, I don't see that. That may be a place to study now, because it's something I did do, but I was doing it to be cool, and it was cool. You know, I mean, I would go with these Bellini tubes of paint, big fat cheap paint, go up to the canvas, which I bought at an art supply store then, you know, and squirt the paint on it, and they had these kind of like whisk broom type brushes, long mural handles on them and everything, and just go to town and not know damn what I was going to do, and still not know when I saw it. But one day I decided I was going to see what the hell they were doing. So I lined up 4 of these large 6 feet by 6 feet canvases, made a wall, and I put a chair in the middle, and I sat in the middle, and I sat there and I looked at these canvases as they talked to each other and left me out. I looked at them and I said, I should be in this conversation, I think, you know, and I wasn't. I just knew, you know. I said, that's it. You know, so I didn't give up the idea of painting, but I gave up the idea that the painting would, or maybe it would talk to me now, but whatever. That was a learning curve moment, because I then, you know, put all my new painting concepts into more figurative stuff, still kind of abstract. I was willing, I'd been to the edge. So that was the edge. And I still admired William de Kooning. I actually met William de Kooning at one point. That was wonderful, because I was with my girlfriend. We went to Slugs, to a jazz club, and saw Charlie Mingus and stuff. And they got, you know, pretty drunk, but not totally drunk, but pretty drunk. So decided to go to the Central Hotel, which was in Soho, and a lot of artists went there. And I usually avoid places where artists would go, even though I wasn't anti-artist. I just, you know, like just another one of them, me, instead of being the only one, right? Whatever it was. And so Jill, who had been a former student of mine, she came with me. Oh, obviously she was with me. So we went over to the to the Central Hotel, came in the door. I hadn't been there that many times, and I saw sitting in the corner William de Kooning. I mean, he was the god, you know, I mean, of the 50s, abstract expressionists. And and I loved his work. And I'd gone to MoMA and saw his stuff, and there it was. And I'd seen him on television talk, and he sounded pretty good. And so I said to Jill, I said, that's Bill de Kooning. She said, Bill who? I said, that's William de Kooning. And I said, and I knew he liked women, and anyway, so I said, why don't you go over and talk to him? Say, so she was game. So she goes over, she's pretty blonde. And next thing I know, Bill de Kooning's kissing her. I mean, there was a bunch of people wanting to go over and see Bill de Kooning. We didn't go, but there was this like no one they knew going over and, getting a little smack on the face. And so I got my beer and I went to sit in the table where I could see him. And he waved to me, and then Jill came over, and so we drank our beer, and then he got up to leave, and he was with an art critic who I knew the name, but I can't remember it now, but he was very famous. And he got up to leave, and he waved, and he went, and the guy had to stop, and the art critic had to stop and pay for the check at the bar. And then I looked over, and Jill wasn't there. So I said, what the? So the next thing I know, I'm seeing Jill not dragging, he came very friendly, like, holding his hand and brought him to the table and said, Jerry, I'd like you to meet Bill de Kooning.
Oh, wow.
And I said, it's like meeting God, and, he knew I was gobsmacked, like I just stared, but I started talking and things, just went very smooth. And next thing I know, there was a bunch of people crowded around, people my age at that time. And they all wanted to talk to Bill de Kooning all of a sudden. And I wouldn't let them, I just like dominated the conversation. And meanwhile, the art critic is taking notes. And de Kooning was like, he says, we talked about Cleveland, Ohio a lot. And this is my quote that no one else has from Bill de Kooning. He says, because when he was in Holland, in Rotterdam, he was a house painter. And when he came here, he was a house painter. That was how he, during the Depression before, he painted houses in New Jersey. And so I said, but you talked about Cleveland, Ohio? And he says, yeah, that's where they make a certain brand of paint. He said the name, I can't remember now. And that was my quote from Bill de Kooning. So I pass it on to you.
Thank you.
So you have a quote from Bill, and he knew some of the teachers I had because he was in WPA with them, doing murals and things. Not that I had, but that I was teaching with. I would mention, that person. Oh, well, I painted this, at some airport or whatever it was, that they did because I kept them alive, the WPA stuff. And so I could exchange a little bit of, I'll say hello to them. I say, yeah, I definitely will. I'll say hello to them. Bill Kooning wants to say hello. Right. So that was wonderful.
Right.
So there's my connections, literally. I mean, Art Spiegelman got me an exhibition at a gallery in New York that was, I wish I remember the name now, but anyway, a cooperative gallery. So like people, you could have 2 people or 3 people shows in a good space in the Chelsea section. So this is post Soho time, and it was wonderful to show because I didn't have to sell them, because what I said earlier that I just can't sell my children, I mean, what am I going to do with the money? I mean, I wouldn't have the pictures. I went online. I left a lot of paintings and stuff behind in New York. I didn't know I left some really good ones, for my personal need. I mean, autobiographical need. And I went online one time, and I got a Google thing, and one of the paintings I'd done in Bob Weaver's class was for sale at auction. And I go, why wouldn't I have brought that with me? I mean, I was rushing out of the place so fast. So it's like, it was just so much junk that I just left things behind. So that touched me. Like, you know, it may not, when you look at your own work, older work, there's something that brings you into that time of the work. You know exactly what you were going through. You know the layers below that. You know, if that's necessary to know that for your memory thoughts. And I bought that. I went online and I was the highest bidder. And now I bought 3 of them, 3 different ones at 3 different times, because the guy there who bought the buildings sold all the stuff that he found. You know, I'm thinking, that's what I'm thinking. You know, he's smart enough to, you know, to do it through an auction thing. And it's an auction that's not that far from me here. I mean, I don't go there physically. It's a Kensington or something like that. Easy to do, buy online, you know.
Sure. I
mean, I buy everything else online, you know, and I'm known as the guy that doesn't sell his work. I have to buy my work, which is kind of nice. I think that's fair, you know. I mean, I'm just going to be left for my nephew to have, you know. I said in an interview with Gil Roth, he did an interview, he came to my house, you know, after What's a Paintoonist came out. And he said, what are you going to do with your work, you know? You know, because he knew I was not a seller of my work. I said, well, I'll give it to Chris Ware, you know, which just popped in my head, you know. And so he was interviewing Chris Ware. Now, Chris Ware, you know, is trusting that he's going to get my work, and I'm going to give it to my nephew. I mean, I have actual will and everything. But at that point, I was just thinking, who would I give it to, you know? I mean, you know, it's like that. Yeah. But it would be somebody that would want it and would be appreciative. And Chris has always been very good to me. Okay.
Well, if you're looking for a home, I'll be happy to take any work that you want.
Okay. Something's off. Oh, go ahead, tell me. I just, my thing.
That's all right. If you need a home for something, I'd be more than happy to take any paintings that you have available.
Gotcha.
There's a question from Dan Theodore, or a statement. Are you there, Dan? Dan?
No, I'm muted myself. Hiya. I guess I wanted to ask a little more about Binghamton. You grew up in Binghamton, I gather, because you bought the house you grew up in.
That's right, I did.
What school did you go to in Binghamton? Central?
Exactly. And I was in AZ fraternity. Oops, okay. I'm losing the sound here. Oh, there you go.
Okay, good. I went to Binghamton for college, and I spent 6 years in Binghamton, partially because I wasn't that good a student. So it seems to be a lot of comic art associated with Binghamton anyway, because Art Spiegelman had associations with Ken Jacobs in the film department, where I studied part of my time in Binghamton.
Yeah.
If you went to Central, I go and ask, did you know Rod Serling?
No, I didn't.
A lot younger than him, I guess.
Yes, yes. Yeah, he I know where he lives, you know, I mean, his place is like on Beethoven Street and stuff. But yeah, and I read about him, you know, and I love, you know, to read about him. And I sense we are in the twilight zone here, but
well, that's sort of what I found in your art, is that I've been looking at a lot of your pictures, and I got Paintoonist today, and I read that and just was overwhelmed by how beautiful it was. But there's certain sort of text, undertow to it that I think of as a little bit like Binghamton is, having lived there, is a little gray, a little depressing, a little,
yeah.
And sort of, I know why Rod Serling ended up writing like his work, and I see a little of that in you too. And I'm
oh, good. Because the valley aspect of it is the clouds lock over it, and so it's gray all the time. So when I moved to New York, you know, I couldn't believe how much sunlight was around, and there's big buildings around me. But you know what I'm saying, that the clouds really.
Yeah, the lock in the valley. It's certainly true there.
Yeah, So it's snowed like crazy just a month ago, just crazy.
I saw the pictures. That was amazing.
Oh.
It wasn't a snow like that in Binghamton since when I was in college in like 78. I think there was a massive storm like that.
I never saw one like that as a kid or anything. I had to shovel out because I shoveled my neighbor's thing.
Oh,
it was pretty good. Well, my nephew's, he's got a big power thing and stuff. He does that too, but I shovel the sidewalk part, you know. So, I don't know how I'd feel if it was like super sophisticated. I would be kind of angry, I think. I like being able to say Rod Serling one here, and flow from the insurance, practical insurance.
I know a friend there who his grandfather lived on the east side. His grandfather would walk over to the train tracks on the east side where he would pick up his job there, and he would every day come home with his lunchbox filled with coal to heat his house for the winter. But
yeah, right. No, I mean it's that kind of, I don't know, like the parts. I mean, it's overwhelming to know the parts of New York. You go someplace and you find it's gone, or later, or it's so new or changed by whoever's running it now. I mean, that's not sad. It's a fact. And so here, recreation parks about 2 blocks away.
Well, I come almost every year for the Luma Festival. I've been coming for that for several years. They do a projection arts show where they do projections of films that were on the sides of buildings where they're designed for the buildings themselves, and they take into account the architectural features of the building and could actually cause the building to look like it's twisting and turning.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
That explains something, because I come out, I've been to like this, the Venetia, what's it called? Oh God, whatever, place where we'd eat and drink and stuff. Venetian something or other.
Yeah, I think that's the name. Yeah.
Yeah. VA, Venetian, Venice, Little Venice.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And they're on the walls of the, on the other, I think of the post office or the federal building, was stuff. And I'm wondering what's going on here. This is pretty bizarre.
They've been doing it, I think, near Labor Day weekend, but they obviously this year it was canceled, but like 20,000, 30,000 people showed up in Binghamton for that, which was almost miraculous.
Yeah, right.
But anyway, I'm taking it away from comics. My apologies, Ben.
That's okay. Well, it's okay by me.
Question from Justin Hawkins.
Okay, Justin.
Hi, Jerry. How are you?
Good.
I'm glad to see you. I took both of your classes in the early 90s at SVA. And,
I thought I recognized you. Isn't it strange? Yeah, I was going to say. I know, really. Good.
And for me and my roommate, we moved out to New York City to go to SVA because we had our senior year of high school in California gone to a portfolio day at Otis School of Design. And as they were cleaning house at the end, we hit up the SVA rep for your poster that he had brought of the sign painter over the coffee cup.
Oh, wonderful.
Plastered that on our crummy little apartment going like, we're going to go to New York someday and study with Jerry Moriarty.
Well, and, that's nice.
Thinking back to those classes, I think I got most of my inspiration more out of talking to you about auras and aliens and things like that, as much as the painting. And I just always remember that, like most of our painting assignments, we were limited to 3 colors. And I know you only wore basically primary and secondary colors in your wardrobe.
Yeah.
And, I'm just wondering, in your own work, what made you kind of choose that limited palette, to do your work?
Well, that was a trend in my work. It wasn't something I permanently did, 3 colors, but I was very aware of it. In fact, this book, I used the secondary colors as my primary colors for the book in the first stages. The other stuff were mixed up, but the first ones you saw with the publisher calling them up, the mob guy looking guy, he that series, that story, until we get to the sketches of it, was primarily in, I think, orange, green, but limited, the same way as you're talking about. But this was in the secondary color world. Not that I know a lot about color. I mean, I just know what primary color is and secondary color is. And if you're limited, you go through whatever shit you go through, you know? So that was okay by me, you know, in that sense. But now I find that I don't want to know that much about what I'm about to do or limit it by virtue of that. But I do limit it in this other way of not doing shadows. I love shadows big time, and, you know, use them all the time. And textures, I don't do them. I mean, how long is this going to last? I don't know, you know, but that's fine, isn't it? I mean, just to have yourself kind of get weirded out by something that you don't just completely do forever, you know? Yeah. It's sort of like a companion, you know, it comes and bites you in the ass. You know?
Yeah, I saw it maybe presented just as a challenge, you know, and it was all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, the guy only wants us to use 3 colors. I'm like, all right, you know, what colors am I going to pick to set the mood for this illustration, you know? So it was good. It was a good thing.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you remembered the colored clothes I wore, because, I mean, that was for a reason. It's also, I love doing it, you know? People would be walking by me in New York City on the street and say, I'd buy that shirt, you know? And not talking to me, you know, but I'd hear them.
You were a sight, yeah. Red Converse, purple jeans, yellow t-shirt.
You got it right. That's exactly, I still do the Converse thing. You know, but I learned in Binghamton, you know, we're talking small town here, don't wear anything more than brown or gray or blue. You're acceptable with blue. Because I was walking down the street and just like what they call a porch drunks or something like that. It's just like yellow people, and they thought I was gay or something, you know, and Binghamton has some sin, I guess. And so he yelled out something. I didn't hear exactly what it was, because that would obligate me to go and punch him in the face, right? So I was carrying 2 computers at the same time, maybe full-size ones, to be fixed. And I came home and I said, you know, that's right. The guy is freaking out because I got colors on, and I'm in Binghamton now. I'm not in New York City. What's my game here? You know, what am I doing that for? So I, you know, went online and bought gray, and not to be one of them. I don't give a shit about being one of them, but just because, what was the color really in New York for? It was for going to the school, enjoying that, being different from the other artists there, and then being different from me. Same way, you know? So that's why I appreciate it. And you picked the right, that's my favorite poster. My first one and my favorite one. I'd been there like 25 years before Silas, and that's because of the things I was doing in Raw. He all of a sudden said, hey, you know, we gotta use this guy for a poster. I mean, I was friendly with him too. I mean, he was a good guy.
Well, I like that W kind of appealed to me, like that kind of WPA look, that kind of just era and that nostalgia. And that kind of hit home, like, just like, yeah, like I said, the kind of proletariat, sort of the working man artist.
Yes.
You know, like in that whole thing at SVA too, because there were your high artists and the low artists in the illustration and cartooning department. And I felt, you know, it kind of raised the low arts up to, you know, a different level. I liked it.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to do.
You must have been a good student, I gotta tell you, or maybe too good. Like I was going under your brains, you know, instead of in them, you know. Yeah. Well, thanks for that. I'm glad you called. You know, I mean, in this winter, this is my first Zoom ever, so.
You're doing great.
Thank you.
Question from Molly.
Take care.
Bernstein.
Take care. Hi, female.
Hi.
Hi. We talked. I mean, we talked. We wrote each other.
We wrote, yes. Yeah. And I was going to ask 2 things. One was if you could talk a little bit more about the first comics that really influenced you or that you remember reading.
Well, that's good. The first comics back in the early days when I was a kid, of course, was Superman. I was born the year Superman was born, as DC, you know, meaning DC was put out Superman in 1938, and that was my year. But I didn't become aware of them for maybe 5 years, right? So we'll say 43. And then they used to have a radio show on every day after school with Superman's adventures. And it was wonderful. I mean, to this day, I wish I could hear it, but somebody's got it somewhere. I'm sure I could get it. So after Superman, and as I began to draw, being able to draw, you know, that was the issue, that who would I draw if I was drawing? I would be drawing comic characters, because that was what kids were doing in school. Not, for, you know, this was on the secret, because the teachers didn't watch you drawing, you know, like while they were teaching. And so I remember in 3rd grade, there was this guy that sat on the left of me, and I sat next to, you know, the old-fashioned desks we had, just opened in the bottom and stuff. And we sat across the classroom, and he was left-handed. So he sat on the other side of me, left, and he would draw shooting down airplanes, and he would raise his right hand, you know, to look at what it was, and be a whole picture underneath something, because as he's drawing from left to right, I wouldn't see anything. I'd just see the scratching away, and then he'd lift his hand and there'd be a whole picture. I go, oh my God, this is magic. And then of course I realized he was left-handed, and that was the whole deal. So it got from there, and then I wanted some of that glory. Yeah, I felt that there was something that made you stand out, you know, I thought. I mean, I was looking for it anyway, because I was a terrible student, as you can imagine. I was in trouble, but I was terrible, you know, but I was a, you know, kind of didn't care. And so the art thing, when I got it, some kid could really draw, and I was jealous of that kid in the class, and I started doing it, and I was going to beat him in my head. In my head, no one's going to say, hey, you're better than he is, but I thought I was. And so that's how it worked. And the next thing I know, kids were saying, hey, can you draw? Well, you know, sure, you know. And so drawing was copying for me. And then one day, it was actually, first of all, it was tracing. And I would show my parents a picture I just you know, without telling them I traced it. But one day I said, I'm going to draw it without tracing it. And I held my breath. I figured if you draw, you have to hold your breath, right? So I held my breath, and I got to the end of the picture. I mean, I had to breathe privately, you know, so no one was there to see me. It was just me, you know. And I got to the end of it, and it was a comic in True magazine, you know, somebody playing poker or something. So I did that, and I showed it to my dad, who was my supporter, I mean, in a real way, and my mom too. And they said, oh, that's nice, Jerry, with that kind of like dismissal of, you know, we know you traced it. And it was that good, I mean, in my head. And in their head, they thought I traced it. Then my dad started bringing home this paper from the office. He worked for AT&T, and pencils and things. And next thing you know, I'm in the cellar, you know, drawing, and my dad's coming home from work. He stand behind me and look at me paint. He said, how about a little red over there, Chair? I think I told that story already, but you know, that was the support I got from him, which was wonderful. So the comics was the initial thing, you know, it opened the door. And then when the comics went from being really funny comics to the Korean War time, when the ECs came out, and they had really realistic, you know, Jack Davis and those people, and you go, before he went to Mad and did the funny stuff again, but he was doing serious stuff then. And I was at that point 12, 15, somewhere around there. And my brother was in the army in the Korean War. He wasn't in the war, he was in Germany, but he was at that time. And I started doing, you know, becoming enthralled with war stuff. And these comics were the best thing ever. I mean, Frontline Combat, Two-Fisted Tale. Then I, you know, went to the other ones, you know, science, fantasy, science fiction, whatever it was. And then, you know, then finally Mad. By Mad, I was out of it, you know, but Mad was great. And I met Harvey Kurtzman, and I met Jack Davis teaching, when I was teaching at SVA. I met Will Eisner. They weren't, you know, I wasn't teaching the same department or anything, but they were teaching comics. And I got a chance to say to him, you know. And at that point, I definitely, you know, fell into it, and it was really working well. So comics was always at the beginning. Then it was in the middle, because I had a student that said something to me like, he does this thing called the Second Sunday in New York, and it was Phil Sewing, and he'd have these conventions every second Sunday, like once a month, but it'd be on the second Sunday. And the New Yorker, I mean, he had this great like ballroom or something they used, and young people go there, be posters there. It was like a Comic-Con. Mm. The same guy put on the 4th of July Comic-Con in New York back when it first started. So I started going there and saw the intensity of everybody. And I started collecting comics. And now I'm in my 30s. I'm collecting comics. I'm looking at the same old Frontline Combat, Two Fist to Tales. I'm saying, this shit is good. This is not comics. This is serious, as it was then to me. But it was serious still. In fact, it was even more germane. And then I found some very special guys, you know, like, and I immediately forget his name, Stardust. It was done by somebody in the late 30s. And he went on to do some more. And I introduced that to Art, because Art knew everything about comics. I mean, he was doing arcade and everything. And I was starting to pick up on the you know, the undergrounds, because I was seeing them there too. And I'm thinking, Jesus, this is personal. These are real. You know, it's not just, it was political too, to some degree, but most of it, a lot of it was personal. And I went for the personal ones the most. I'm trying to think of, there's somebody that, oh God, I totally forgot his name, but Green. The guy, pardon?
Justin Green.
Yeah, Justin Green. Oh, he knocked me out. I mean, when he, you know, that one thing he said about like he'd get a hard on when he walked in front of the Catholic Church. I said, see, well, boy, this guy's, you know, he's just like not holding back anything. He's like Mr. like overshare. It wasn't overshare, it was like perfect. And I said, I got it. He's got it. You know, there's, and all that stuff he did, you know, and I got to meet his girlfriend or his wife at the time at one of the cons in New York. She was nice as hell. So it was, you know, it was building, and Art got me into it. I mean, because you want to talk about Art, and I think I wrote you that I asked him, because he taught at SVA, if he'd come over to see my stuff, because I got this grant and I started doing these Jack Survives. I did about 6 or 7 pages at that point. And he said, yeah, you know, because not that he heard of me, because there's nothing. Well, I guess from illustration he could have, you know, to somewhat. And we had students in common, you know, trying to think, Kaz and some others that were his students that he was also doing raw with in that early days. Kaz was something. We had a ball. I mean, because, you know, he's really working class, you know. This is before he went west, you know. And anyway, so Art said yes, he'd come, and he came, because I lived near the school. I mean, that was where my loft was, you know. It was at 6th Avenue and 28th Street. And I got that because I talked to somebody at the school. I mean, that wasn't like, you know, like I'm doing everything right. It's sort of stumbled into it. And he was wonderful, as I heard he was. And Francoise came a little bit later. I didn't even know her at all. She came, and I was showing them paintings, these big 6 foot by 6 foot paintings. And I was there to show them these like 7 pages, you know, that were 18 by 24. So they weren't little tiny pages, but, you know, there they were. And there weren't that many panels on them. I think there were 3 or 4 on each. Maybe, yeah, 4 on each. And So they're trying to like get me to show them to them. And yeah, I finally did. I finally stopped, showing, because people, if they came to visit me, they wanted to see the paintings. I thought, I didn't know. I assumed they wanted to see the paintings, and they didn't have a choice anyway. So they see these feet walking by with these big paintings in front of their feet, because I was completely hidden behind the painting, walking to put it up on. And so there it was. So that's what they got. And then finally he said, well, you said something about comics? I said, yeah. And I said, here they are. Because I liked them enough to show them to somebody who was important enough to my mind, and also known. I mean, I was reading Arcade and stuff like that. So I knew he was good. And so, and he was doing Mouse then, just doing it. And Francois was taking up the slack, because the Mouse thing was like, he was on it, not on a deadline, but I don't know what the hell it was, but he was constantly trying to get that done, And so he looked at it and he said to Francois, or she said to him, I don't know which, that this is something of what they were looking for, because they were looking for these European artists or the American artists that were like the European artists that they already liked. And they weren't finding them beyond the ones they already knew. I mean, he had Griffith and he had a lot of people that were already in, and he definitely loved the guy's name, I can't remember. I get a hard on when I walk by the church. Justin Green, my God, I think getting old and you forget things, it's just your brain saying there's like, you need to delete because there's just too much stuff in there now. So I accept it. Okay, so like every day's a Jeopardy game, What's that guy's name? Oh, that's Brad Pitt, What's wrong with you? You have to know who Brad Pitt is? Yeah.
So was the Jack Survives Raw one shot your first strip?
No, I was in the first one of the premiere issue of Raw. I mean, they were at that point, and they were just going for stuff. And I was in the first issue. And one page, it was just one page. I mean, that's how they worked back then. I mean, I didn't have many more pages they wanted. It may have been two, but I think it was one. And so then I don't know who did the first one shot, but I think I did the second or the third, whichever it was. It was, by then I was like fully invested in it, in Jack. I mean, I knew I was on the right track personally. It wasn't the success part of it. The other people told me I was okay. I had to think that myself, and I was thinking right, and I was liking that possibility. And so that's how that built to continue doing it, and meeting those people there. I mean, the different people that were working for him, not working for him full time, but I mean, people doing jobs for them, doing their own things and bringing them in. Ben was a very big part of that early days as well. He was like Raw too. I mean, when they were gone to Europe or wherever, to Paris or wherever, Ben was running it. He was doing a lot of stuff. Plus his own work. I mean, my God. And he was also doing his own, he was printing, he did a thing called Picture Story 1, and then he started, actually Picture Story 2, I was in that with him, because by then he was a student of mine, not every time I say that, I go, yeah, I taught him things, right? No, he was in my class. That's the right way to put it. And we enjoyed each other. So that's Raw 1 was at that point. And so when he came to do the one shot, they were having trouble coming up with something really extraordinary as a cover. I just wanted to do that cover as a painting, painted out. It was full color.
Which one?
It's this one, right?
Yeah, acetate. And we had to fold all these things. They had these wall parties where all the artists would get in one room and do whatever was necessary. Like there was one where they ripped off a part of the front cover.
Oh yeah.
And put it inside. There were people coming in to just do that, rip off the front cover and put it inside. And so my party was like fold the acetate, you know, and I wasn't that too happy with that because it wasn't my idea at all, you know, at first. I mean, I didn't realize later on. I mean, I got to love it, you know, but later on it was appreciated and isolated. But I would go to these comic stores and see that book without the acetate. And
really?
Yeah, because people would just like walk away with the acetate. You know, they have a full black and white. And I started getting a little bit angry at that. I mean, that's not something I would have anticipated, but it was such a clever idea. And he was doing it at the same time as he's doing the mouse thing. So he's a busy guy. I mean, you know, it was amazing. He got all that done, you know, and so well. So I showed him that one I was just talking about, the guy, the flame guy. Anyway, I showed him that comic book, and he'd never seen that 40s comic book. You know, the Fletcher Hanks one. You know,
Stardust.
Stardust, exactly. And you know, Francoise was impressed too, because she was surprised that he didn't know about something, you know, that was clearly a part of her. Not clearly, because no one else knew about it. And when I got it, I mean, I jumped on it, and I applauded my own personal taste, you know, when they said they liked it too, because I didn't expect anybody else necessarily to like it, you know. I liked Nancy when no one, well, other people did like it, but they were like private Nancy likers, you know. And I became public Nancy liker. In fact, they finally asked me to do a Nancy. United Features did. Somebody did.
Okay, wait. You know, you could, if you want, you could just say good night over the phone. Hold on. Put you on speakerphone. Okay. Can everybody hear that? Wait.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear him? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, everybody, thanks for watching whatever I wrote. And I enjoyed it. It's the first time I've ever done anything like this. I enjoyed it. And it's Binghamton, New York. I wish it was New York, but it's okay. Binghamton's fine for the full something. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody's applauding. So I'll be in touch, Jerry.
Okay.
Thank you.